Now then, there's been a call for more pressure on companies in our region to pay the living wage. It comes in fact from our guest Chris Williamson, who wants to make sure council and public spending contracts only go to companies who guarantee to pay their workers what's regarded as an income that's comfortable to live off rather than just the minimum wage. But can employers afford it? Our political reporter Tim Parker has been to one company which pays workers a living wage to find out.
In an industry notorious for paying the minimum wage, here's an exception. Drivers' wages start at least £8 an hour, and some earn as much as £20 an hour. The company's always made better pay a priority.
His competitors say he's bonkers, but Alan White, who's managing director of Fresh Logistics, says paying the living wage makes business sense.
We started with some seedling finance, about £5,000. And over the last 4 or 5 years, it's grown at 260% every year. So now we're going to be turning over about £2.5 million.
So what is the living wage? It's a pay rate that means workers earn enough to cover the basic costs of living, and it's set at £7.85 an hour, higher than the minimum wage of £6.50 an hour. Opponents say that's not enough to live off. In the East Midlands, it's estimated there are 414,000 people earning below the living wage. That's 24% of the workforce.
A lot of people will be saying, how can you afford this, though?
We find that we gain efficiencies within the business because we have motivated people that we retain. We don't have to retrain every 6 months, and we don't have this churn that most businesses have because we're paying people the living wage.
And do you think that is the secret of your success?
Oh, completely. Completely not. I'm not smart enough to do this. I need a collective of people to do this, and as you can see, the guys behind me are very smart and have delivered in the business year on year on year.
We've set out with a plan from the start that we're going to do things our way. Part of that is to look after the guys, look after the staff, make sure they're well reimbursed for the work that they do.
And what does the difference between the minimum wage and living wage mean to people who work at the company?
I've worked for companies that pay the minimum wage before. It seems that you're increasingly chasing the bills, increasingly getting into debt. But since working for Fresh, that's a thing of the past now. I've been able to sort out my finances and plan for the future.
Drivers like Steph are still a rarity. It's reckoned that only 40 private firms across the East Midlands are signed up to pay the living wage. The pressure's growing on other companies to join them.
Well, Chris, you want to ensure that public contracts handed out in Derby only go to firms paying the living wage. Would it work?
I think it would work, and I've actually written to all of the companies with more than 100 employees in the Derby travel to work area, not just those that do public sector contracts, to urge them to adopt the living wage because it makes economic sense. It makes economic sense for the business because it actually helps with recruitment and retainment of their employees. But it also, and we've seen this from companies, improves the employees' productivity. So it's a kind of win-win situation. It puts more money into the pocket of workers. That's then spent in the local economy. So that goes to help create and sustain other jobs and services.
Does it make sense for those companies just starting up, though, Chris, that can't afford to pay higher wages and they're struggling?
I think that's a misnomer. I mean, you know, to be honest with you, I think it's important that we start to make capitalism work for people, not just for those at the top of society. And what I would like to see is moving towards a position where no company could declare a dividend for shareholders until they're paying the living wage. I think that would be reasonable. If we did that, that would then put pressure on the shareholders to pressurise the companies to make sure they treat their workers properly. They should benefit from the fruits of the success of any company that they're working for. Okay. They're the people that create the success.
Well, Maggie, you've got a business consultancy, as I was saying earlier. Do many of the companies that you deal with pay the living wage?
They pay a wide range of salaries.
But do they pay the living wage?
You never ask people what they're paid or what they pay, so you don't really know. But I think, yeah, I take my hat off to Fresh for paying the living wage. I think it's really good that businesses are able to do that. But as Chris said, it's also about how much money people have in their pockets. And in Erewash constituency alone, over the last 4 years, we've taken 4,600 and some people out of paying income tax altogether. So that means they've got more money in their pockets. And over 38,000 more people have had a pay an income tax cut because we've changed the threshold of when people pay tax. So they're going home with more money in their pockets, which is vitally important.
Maggie, they're paying more through things like VAT, and the more you put indirect taxes up, the more it impacts upon people on low income. So that's why we've seen an exponential increase in in-work poverty. More and more people going to food banks who are in employment.
This is from a member of the party who put council tax up 10 times during their year after year after year. That's an indirect tax. That's something that people have got to pay. So it's far more important that you make sure people have more money in their pockets.
Well,
but you're not there, are you? Because people are having to pay more through things like VAT and rising prices.
Chris, the Federation of Small Businesses has told us it agrees that companies should actually be paying a living wage. They agree with you there, but it should be an aspiration rather than being forced into doing it.
We've heard all these arguments when the minimum wage was being debated. I remember doing a survey of the job centres in Derby in 1996.
I think the worry is that they worry that the bigger firms will win the contracts and that Derby would lose out.
No, I don't think that's true. Fresh, I don't think, is a huge company, and I think if people value their employees, they will get more out of their employees. It does make economic sense for for the businesses, as well as making economic sense for the wider economy. And of course, it makes sense for the workers themselves and their families, because they're not worried so much about how they can put food on the table, pay their bills with the rising energy prices, with profiteering big six energy companies.
Okay, well, I think this is clearly going to be a big issue, isn't it, in the run-up to the next election.